I'm Leonard Nimoy. Join me for In Search of
An Argument.
Welcome to In Search of an Argument. I am Shelley Cummings. I am here with our podcast friends, Jim Gentili. John Heinz, and Beth Shannon. Jim has a name tag on that says John, so
It's
I
a
get a little
long
confused.
story which
Yeah.
no one would possibly be interested in. But
I think I popped into the wrong room here.
Right.
Did we miss the wine tasting before this, Shelley? Because I think you've had your fair share. So.
No, nothing. There's something in my banana, I think. We will not be joined by Peggy Bennett this evening. However, we have a very special guest today for the podcast, Dr. Joanna Zeiger.
Return guest,
yes. She has a master's, which is where I met her at Northwestern. We were in graduate school together, and a PhD. She's a cannabis epidemiologist who is the founder and CEO of Canna Research Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to unbiased cannabis research. She's also the chief scientific officer of Clinica Research, a clinical research organization that does clinical trials on natural and alternative medicines and devices. Dr. Zeiger also coaches endurance athletes. She did not put this in her bio, but I am going to add it. She went to the Olympics and is an Olympic athlete and has a wonderful history and story to tell there. She also has a book, The Champion Mindset, which is an athlete's guide to mental toughness and can be found on Amazon. So welcome, Joanna, again to our little podcast. And we are excited to have you as our guest this evening.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's like visiting with old friends. Well, Shelley, you are an old friend and you are new old friends. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Great.
Great to have you.
So I thought we would start off by, I could say a broad question. What have you been doing since the last time you've been on the podcast? But that kind of opens it up to a lot of different avenues. But instead, I thought, how about talking about something that is top of mind for you, in whether it's your research, whether it was the Olympics that just wrapped up. That's where I think would be a nice place to start as a platform, and then we can go on to other topics because we are not a shy group.
All right. Well, talking about the Olympics, it's funny. I am a huge Olympics fan, not just because I went to the Olympics. I always loved the Olympics. I love watching sports. I love watching people who are the best at what they do going head to head against each other. But I love the unity that the Olympics brings. It doesn't matter what country you're from, that you see so much camaraderie out there and people from other countries that you wouldn't normally see giving each other hugs and cheering each other, coming together for the greater good of sport and to see what they can do and push themselves. And I love that about the Olympics. But prior to the Olympics, went in 2000, Sydney. Triathlon was my sport, and it was the first time triathlon was ever contested in the Olympics. So I did several interviews prior to the Olympics, and I had this epiphany that it was almost a quarter of a century since I went to the Olympics, and boy, did that make me feel old. I did love reliving all of those special moments. But I was like, I'm surprised I can remember them because it was so long ago and I'm getting so old that my memory is probably going away. John, you have a question?
Yeah. Jim, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. What did you think were the best events at the most recent Olympics? Like, what were your favorite events?
Well, I mean, I love to watch track and field. I like to watch swimming. Obviously, triathlon. In fact, triathlon in 2021, which should have been 2020, but at the Tokyo Olympics, debuted something called the mixed triathlon relay. And that is where you have 2 males and 2 females, each competing in a mini triathlon. So
Wow.
the male goes first and does a very, very short, approximately 20-minute triathlon. Then they hand off to their teammate who's a female, and that person will do their swim, bike, run, etc., until all 4 people are done. And it's very short, 20 minutes, as I said, whereas the individual event for the men is about an hour and 50 minutes, and the women are just under 2 hours. So 20 minutes is very short and very fast, and the excitement of it is just incredible. So I very much enjoyed that event. So many world records were broken on the track.
I was
Swimming was,
asking, it's like, was there one particular track event or one particular swimming event that really stood out to you, or more than one or two or
well,
something?
I'd say the track event that stood out for me is the women's 400-meter hurdles. Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone is just a superstar and just so far beyond what anybody thought was possible in terms of performance. So it was a pleasure watching her. Not to say that, I mean, so many of the events were just amazing to watch. Noah Lyles winning the 100 meters was exciting by you know, by half a hair length. Swimming,
That's great.
there were just so many unexpected results. That's what I love about the Olympics. You just can't, you can make
Mhm.
all your prognostications like you can with any sport, but until it actually goes off, you don't know what's going to happen.
So, I have a question about all the records that continue to be broken each year. What do you think that is attributed to? I mean, the athletes getting stronger, different training, different nutrition,
What sport?
like all of them.
Well, I think that without being too controversial, well, let me start with the non-controversial
Where
things.
we
If we're
don't, yeah,
looking,
we don't shy away from that, but yeah,
I know
go
you
for it.
don't, but so if you look at a sport like track and field, there have been huge developments in footwear that have
Huh.
made big differences from sprinting all the way up to the marathon. I don't
Hmm.
know if you saw the results of the Chicago Marathon this past weekend, but a
Yeah.
woman broke 2:10 in the marathon for the first time ever, which, I mean, it just blows my mind. Only 2 American men beat her, and I think she was top 10 overall. That's a performance of the ages. So there's been a lot of technological advances. There have been nutritional advances, which are all very helpful. But we can't shy away from the fact that there is a specter of doping that has been with sports for as long as sports have been
Mhm.
around, since the very first Tour de France. People have been doping, and I feel like I lost out on an Olympic medal due to doping. The woman who won the triathlon the year that I competed, about a year or so later, got caught for taking EPO, which is a blood booster. So sports and doping seem to go hand in hand, unfortunately, and it's always hard to know who's clean and who's not clean. So I'll speculate a lot of times, but I will also enjoy the performances as I see them, because there's nothing like a good head-to-head matchup, and watching the progression is still amazing. And we know that doping's always been there. So I don't know. I have very mixed emotions about the progression, but it's still exciting to watch.
It is exciting. Yeah. Jim, do you have another question? Your hand is
No,
still raised. Oh,
oh,
okay.
I don't. John, did
Has,
you have a
so,
question?
well, I'm just wondering how attitudes have changed toward that, because I feel like, it's gotten worse, but maybe it's just more media attention is given to it these days. Because the doping seems to be complete. The doping seems. I feel like I'm just reading more about it than I used to, but maybe that's just, and maybe that's also, is that also indicative of just the state of the world that we're a little more separated than we used to be, and maybe a little more willing to fight with each other or argue about things like that. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on how it's changed?
I think that it's many things. I think that some countries that had very poor doping control in the past have been reprimanded, and so they're doing more doping tests, which means they're catching more people,
Mm,
which is a good thing. So you're reading about more positives because they're performing more tests, and when you perform more tests, more people get caught.
sure.
I think that's part of it. I think that there are designer drugs out there. The dopers are always one step ahead of the doping control. That's always been the case. And so all they have to do is rearrange a molecule here or something there and change the chemical structure. And all of a sudden it becomes difficult to test for. So I think there are many reasons why we hear about it more. To me, as somebody who's got what used to be a 6-pack is now a 12-pack of health problems, and I'm on a
Ooh, that's a good one.
regimen of medications that would blow your mind. And I don't like taking any of them, and I don't want to take them. I can't imagine putting something into your body that you have no idea what the consequences will be sometime down the line. When I was racing, I knew that I was competing against people who doped, but I didn't let that bother me because I loved the sport and I was doing it for me. And I wanted to see how far I could push my limits. And I always felt that no matter what happened, I could wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and know that I did things with integrity. And I've been retired since 2010. And I can still say that I conducted myself with utmost integrity to the best of my ability, and that I didn't do anything nefarious to accomplish what I did. And you've got nothing but that. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're an athlete or anytime you're doing anything and anytime you're at the top of whatever it is, you have a shelf life and there's something that has to come afterwards. And who wants to look back and know that you did something dishonestly?
Joanna, do you
Well said.
think, to John's point, that one of the reasons that we're seeing more um, publicity about this is that there are at least a few countries, not to mention any names, but China and Russia, that
And Kenya.
that
And
are
Kenya.
almost deliberately flouting the doping rules now and pressuring the international regulatory bodies to ignore what seem to be clear violations by their athletes.
Well, I think the scandal that blew up in Russia after, I believe it was the Sochi Olympics, and whistleblowers came forward, and there was a lot of investigation that went into that, and the widespread program that they had that went all the way up to the very highest levels. That certainly was a catalyst for things that are occurring now. That was such an egregious doping situation, kind of analogous to what happened in East Germany, back in the 70s and early 80s. China has long had, their issues with doping. Kenya doesn't have a systematic doping program like Russia did before Sochi, but they do have a massive doping problem. I think they've had made over 200 people caught in the last, I don't know, 5 or so. I don't know how many years. I'm not going to give it a number, but in the last many years, they've had just so many high level, medium level, low level athletes caught for various substances. So I think that people are getting bad advice from whether it's their managers or their coaches or whomever it is that they are training with or whoever they're around. Some people feel like Lance Armstrong did, everybody's doing it. Why shouldn't I? There's a multitude of reasons why people decide to dope. But I think a lot of people who are doping don't feel that it's wrong because they think everybody else is doing it, so should I.
So I know Shelley backed away from this question, but I kind of want to know. So what have you been focused on since we last talked to you? I mean, we talked last time about champions mindset, and I am a bad podcast host because the last time we talked to you, we talked about it, and I had not read the book, and I read it after we spoke, at this point it's been quite a while back. But I guess I'm curious about. I mean, I'm curious about how you're, with the rise of new training technologies and, mental health awareness and the things that you're hearing about in terms of training different these days, how you feel like the book's held up and how you feel like it's doing and who would be, the ideal audience to maybe keep it in front of today.
I think the book has definitely held up because a lot of the concepts that I brought up in the book, things about determination and hope and having the right team around you and having integrity, those are things that never change. Those are things that we should always aspire to. I didn't really talk that much about specific training techniques because it wasn't a book about training. And like you said, training changes over time. And I wanted something that was really going to be something that somebody could go back to in 10 years from now and say, oh yeah, I remember. I need to I need to reinvigorate my hope. My hope is really low right now for whatever reason, and I've got to find some hope somewhere or some passion. I think that hope and passion drive everything. If you have hope and passion, it will get you through a lot. Since we last spoke, I wasn't in great health when we spoke last time, but my health has declined since then. But I maintain hope and I maintain passion, and that's what gets me through the day. So in terms of who is an audience, it was written for athletes. That's, the champion mindset and athlete's guide to mental toughness. But I really feel like anybody who wants to succeed in anything could substitute out the word athlete for whatever it is that they're after. Whether it's business or some kind of hobby or whatever it is they're trying to improve upon in life, I think this book would serve them well. And at some point, I would want to make an update to the book, but sort of in a different direction. Having chronic illness and chronic pain myself, I would like to write a book that would be more directed to people that are suffering from chronic conditions, because it is so pervasive here in the US and throughout the world.
So, Joanna, along those lines, as I understand it, some of what led you into what you're doing now with the Canna Research Foundation and some of your work was a result of some of the pain that you were going through, that has led you to do more research in cannabis and the help that can provide. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Or did I just completely mix up how you led to
you
that
are
pathway?
completely right about that. So I have two lives in the world of cannabis. When I moved to Boulder in 2002, to move here in 2002 or 2003. I don't know. I've lived here a long time. It goes by really fast. I guess I moved in 2003.
After 9/11.
Wow.
It's always like one of those milestones I can remember before and
so
after.
we moved here in 2003. And in 2004, I started working at CU Boulder at the Institute for Behavioral Genetics, studying drug use and abuse and conduct disorder in adolescents and young adults. And one of the drugs that we studied was cannabis. I like to make this joke that when you're doing research looking at the negative aspects of it, it's marijuana research. So I did marijuana research at CU Boulder, and now I do cannabis research because I'm looking at it from a more neutral perspective. But of course, we don't want young adults, teenagers, young children. We don't want them using THC. CBD, I think for the most part, is deemed pretty safe, and Epidiolex is an FDA-approved CBD-derived drug for seizure disorders in kids. So we do know that kids are using CBD, particularly for seizure disorders, but we also know that kids who are using, and the cannabis of today is not the cannabis of when we were growing up. It is very high potency. You can find things that are less potent, but some of them are extremely high potency. And you get this into the hands of young people, it can cause psychotic episodes, it can cause cannabis use disorder. So certainly not a group who should be using THC. That being said, it did give me my background into the substance. And at the time I was racing professionally and I was getting drug tested, and all forms of cannabis or marijuana were illegal at the time. So CBD was not legal, THC was not legal. If you had it in your system and you tested positive for it, you would have a strike against you and you would serve some kind of penalty. The rules have changed. The governing body who oversees drug testing, WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, has taken CBD off the list, and it's federally legal here in the US as of 2018. And THC, which is a psychoactive component of cannabis, or one of the psychoactive components of the plant, instead of making it yes, it's in your system, you've got a doping positive, they've changed it to what they call a threshold drug. So you're allowed to have it in your system up to a certain threshold. And if you go above that threshold, then you will have a doping positive. And it's not allowed to be used in competition. So the competition window is something like 12 hours before you compete until
12
whenever.
hours.
I don't know exactly now, but there is a competition window. Now, that sounds all fine and dandy. Great. Let's all go use cannabis. But the problem is nobody knows what it takes to reach that threshold. Is it a 10 milligram gummy 2 weeks ago? Is it a 5 milligram gummy the night before? Is it a few puffs here? So that's the very difficult part, is that there is no advice that you can give an athlete who is in the doping pool, who's getting tested in the testing pool, about what they should be doing so that they don't test positive. And so the only advice you can really give is to abstain for a certain period of time, so that if you get tested in competition, you won't fall afoul of the rules. But
Is that because there's no research in that area to know, like that, because it's frowned upon?
well, I don't think so much that it's frowned upon is the problem. There are two issues. One is the federal regulation that cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, and so studying it means that you need to have a Schedule 1 license. Those are very difficult to come by. And if you want to study it, you also have to get it from a supplier that has been approved by the government, basically, the NIH. So there are a million hurdles to being able to do clinical trials. We are getting creative. People are getting creative. I will give you an example. Here at CU Boulder, they have something called the Canavan. I think they also have one at CSU Fort Collins. They basically bought a bus and kitted it out with all of the lab equipment that they need for their studies. And then they drive this big bus up to somebody's house who is a participant in their study. They will watch the participant on Zoom take the product. So they'll oftentimes work with a cannabis company, will supply product. The participant will go to the dispensary, purchase it at some kind of discount, so that the researchers never ever touch the plant or give it to the research participant. So they will watch. So the participant will come into the van, have all their baseline testing. They'll go into their house, take whatever dose they're supposed to take, and then they'll come back out to the van and have all their testing done.
How effective
So
is that?
that's one
How
way of getting
effective is
around
this?
it.
Yeah, how effective are these overall, like in terms of the state of the art?
They've had pretty. I mean, it's been effective. They've published lots of papers using this methodology, and right now, I mean, it's not your perfect scenario, but it's better than not being able to do a trial at all. And then, there are other observational ways of doing it, so that you can get actual real world data by have people using tracking apps and other kinds of things. So, we're getting creative to be able to get the data we need. And we need it desperately.
I mean, don't bury the lead for me, because I know absolutely nothing. What do we know now that we didn't know a year ago, 5 years ago?
Well, first I want to get back to Shelley's original question of
Yeah, do it.
why did I get involved in cannabis research? And I did get involved. So after my experience being a professional athlete and working at CU Boulder, where the gateway theory was the theory of the time, where using marijuana was going to lead to harder drug use, that has since been debunked. But to me, it was this horrible drug that had never occurred to me. It had medicinal purposes. Like it never crossed my mind. And then I had a bike accident in 2009, which I believe we spoke about in the last podcast. But when I was defending my world championship title, I was essentially pulled off my bike at an aid station and did severe damage to my collarbone, decimated my rib cage. To this day, I'm having issues with it. And that was 15 years ago. I've got really severe neuropathic pain. And like I said, I have a 12-pack of other problems. My husband kept telling me, look, you have a qualifying condition. It was legal here medically before it was recreationally. He's like, why don't you try cannabis? I couldn't sleep. I had no appetite. I was having spasticity. I was having pain, all of the things. And I was just too ashamed. I just, there were too many barriers in my way. I didn't believe in its medical use. I didn't know how to procure a card. I was ashamed to talk to my doctors about it. That was the height of the opioid epidemic, and they were just handing out, opioids like candy, which I didn't want that either. But, there were too many barriers. It became legal here in 2014. And when the dispensaries opened for adult use, it lifted a barrier. I didn't have to go get a medical card. And by then I was pretty desperate. So I marched into the dispensary and I was like, these are my problems. Can you help me? Now, asking the people that work behind the counter are called bud tenders. And particularly back in 2014, bud tenders, did not know anything because we didn't know anything. There was just, back then, the research was just horrendous. And there was very little on the medical possibilities of cannabis. So, they gave me this patch to use and they gave me some gummies. And at that time, the way they were making gummies, they would just spray some THC on top of them. So maybe you get a gummy that had some THC and some that didn't. I mean, things have come a very, very long way. And I did not want to go with the inhalation route, if at all possible, because I have asthma. So I take the patch. They told me to put it on the inside of my leg. I did that. I was so high. I cannot tell you how high I was. I don't even think I knew my name. It was
Do you have any of
unpleasant.
those patches left over?
Right.
No, if I did, they probably wouldn't even work anymore. It was many, many moons ago. But I don't particularly like being high, and I very much did not like being that high. But I fell asleep, and I slept well. So I'm a scientist. I'm not deterred by the fact that I took a little bit too much. I just have to titrate it down. And so over time, I started, experimenting on myself. I'm a guinea pig, whatever. I started experimenting to try and find out the best regimen for me. And I was like, man, this is really amazing for appetite, and it is helping my sleep. Didn't really help my pain as much as I would have liked. But one of the things I say about cannabis is, and it's not great for neuropathic pain, it's better for more musculoskeletal pain. One of the things I say to people is, even if it doesn't help your pain, it eases your suffering. And those are two very different constructs, because you can have pain without suffering. If you stub your toe, you're not going to really suffer. It's going to hurt a little bit. And if you lose a loved one, you don't have physical pain, but you're really suffering. And to me, cannabis kind of bridges that gap, and it eases that suffering component so that you can deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with much more easily, because your suffer scale has gone down. And I find that that's done that for me. So I started talking to everybody in the industry. I talked to medical users, I talked to recreational users, I talked to growers, I talked to researchers. I just talked to anybody that was willing to talk to me. And I did a lot of literature searches as well to find out what was out there. And I was just appalled. And that was why I decided to start doing unbiased cannabis research, because at that time there just wasn't enough of it out there. I started my foundation in 2018. The landscape has changed markedly since then. I was a little ahead of my time. Some of the things I wanted to do back then are now being done. Things move very slowly, but we've been very productive. We've done a lot of studies. We've had a lot of publications. We've learned a lot. There's still so much to learn. I'd say the biggest reasons why people use cannabis are for pain, anxiety, sleep, and I think depression. I'd say those would be sort of the big four. But pain and sleep are way high up there in almost any survey study that you see. So it's been really an interesting journey. And while people are screaming from the rooftops they want more research, nobody wants to fund it. So we've got federal regulations that are standing in the way of being able to do clinical trials.
Huge.
And then we've got funding issues as well. So cannabis research is not easy, but I'm like a rabid dog. So I'm just sinking my teeth in and shaking it, and wherever things fall out, they fall out.
It's great. It's so great. You're nothing like a rabid dog.
When it comes to trying to get what I want, I'm like a rabid dog.
That's fair. The Schedule 1 thing has to be one of the most ridiculous area. I mean, pharmaceutical research generally, and then that's got to make it impossible.
But isn't there some movement from some surprising players to get rid of the Schedule 1 designation? I thought I just read that.
It's gone through so much. There have been, the FDA and HHS, what is that, something health service. There have been a lot of government entities involved in trying to collect information. So like the Colorado School of Public Health, for example, put together a huge literature review on everything about cannabis. The positives, the negatives. Cannabis has huge benefits medically, but it's not without its downsides as well. Like I said, use in youth is not great. nobody has died from an overdose of cannabis, although there is something called cannabis allergy. It's a weed, so people are allergic to it. And unfortunately, a worker in Massachusetts had an anaphylactic reaction to inhaling cannabis dust and unfortunately died from that. So, there are things that we have to be careful about. People can get psychosis. So there are certain demographics of people who probably should not be using it, such as people who have a family history of psychosis or have psychosis themselves. So, there are still things that we need to learn. There are still groups that are at risk. We don't have an agreed upon dose. If you go to your local pharmacy and you buy a bottle of ibuprofen, you know that one tablet is 200 milligrams. With cannabis, there is no specific dosing. There's no specific labeling. So we have a lot of things that we need to do to sort of catch up to where we are with use. But yes, it should be rescheduled. There's a lot of commentary, and I think there's going to be another hearing, but they could potentially reschedule it to Schedule 3, which would help things. But the ideal situation would be that Congress just legalizes it and bypasses all this other nonsense that we're going through that's delaying everything that we need. And they could just in one fell swoop just legalize it. And that's what kind of the hope is. I know that both presidential candidates have said that they would legalize cannabis. Do we believe politicians? Probably not. But there is some hope that it will be either rescheduled or descheduled altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit back to John's question a while ago, you mentioned that the research and what was happening in 2014 was pretty horrendous. And so 10 years later, what do we know now that we didn't know then? Or what advances have we progressed towards?
Well, I think there are quite a few things. Number one, attitudes nationally have changed toward cannabis, where most people support it in one fashion or another, whether they support it for medical use only or they support it for both medical and adult use. And more people are using cannabis now than they are using alcohol. So the stigma of cannabis has really changed since 2014, which I think leads the way toward where we are with, hopefully getting it either rescheduled or legalized. So that has been a huge change. Unfortunately, things like education among physicians is not very good, so they're not comfortable talking to their patients. But we have found that it is helping for many medical indications. If you take it at the right dose, and everybody's different, everybody metabolizes it differently, but it can help with things like depression and PTSD and anxiety. Anxiety is a little bit fraught because if you take too much, it will increase your anxiety. But if you take the right amount, it can help it. So we've done surveys where the same person will say that it improves their anxiety, but it also increases it. And a lot of that is dose dependent, and it also could be dependent on a route of administration. We're learning more about what inhalation methods do to the lungs. I've been part of an international cannabis allergy group, and we're making a lot of headway into understanding cannabis allergy, which is going to become more prevalent as people get exposed to it more. So even if you're not allergic now, let's say that you're an occupational worker who's around cannabis all the time, you can actually become sensitized to it over time and develop allergy. So those are some things that we're working on. We're looking at one of the big things that people are looking at is driving and how cannabis use impacts driving. So a lot of people are using driving simulators and fMRIs to see what's going on with that. We're learning a bit about how it affects cognition. One of the issues is that there are a lot of issues, but one issue is that, nothing is definitive. One study will say this and then another study will refute it. But when you look at survey studies, it's pretty consistent upon reasons for use and people feeling like it's helping them with certain things. That's been pretty consistent. The pain, the sleep, the mental health type stuff, relaxation. People are using it for those reasons, and they are finding that it's helping for that. But when it comes to cannabis, anybody who's listening who is thinking about initiating cannabis, the mantra in the world of cannabis: start low, go slow. So take less than you think you need, because you can always add some on, but if you take too much, you cannot take it away.
So I'm
And
amazed
if
at.
you're on, sorry, I just
Yeah,
have to give
no,
another
yeah.
caveat. Talk to a medical professional if you can before you initiate a cannabis program, and don't rely on your bud tender to give you advice. There are cannabis doctors out there. There are cannabis nurses out there that will help you navigate the cannabis space for whatever indication that you're using it.
Well, that's actually what I was going to ask about the bud tenders. Have they gotten better? I mean, I imagine that the states. I mean, I don't know that much about how different states are doing it differently, but I know that the different states are doing it differently in terms of the ones that have legalized. And I don't know. Have any of them actually set any kind of a credential for being a bud tender, or any kind of expertise, or is it the Wild West?
It's not as much the Wild West as it used to be. Some bud tenders are very educated, some less so. Bud tenders are often telling pregnant women that it's okay to use cannabis, and it probably is not. Some studies have shown that it could be a teratogen, or have other implications downstream on cognition. So it's not something that pregnant women should be using at this time until we have more information on how it can affect the pregnancy. And the other component to this, you asked how the landscape has changed. There are a lot of cannabis institutions now. I'm actually on a governing board for the Institute of Cannabis Research at CSU Pueblo, and have been for many years. I've been involved with them. They have an annual conference. Many other schools have implemented similar programs. Johns Hopkins has a program, Utah has a program, UCLA has a program, UCSD has a program. So these are research programs, but there are also many schools that are having either master's programs or certificate programs, so that you can get certified in some component of the cannabis industry, whether it's the business side of things, whether it's the cultivation side of things, whether it's just getting educated on cannabis. So there are a lot of curricula out there now that are geared toward educating people that want to go into the field in some capacity. Whether there's specific bud tender certification or education, I'm not quite sure, but there are many more conduits to getting educated than there used to be.
So, Joanna, with all of those major institutions having research or doing research in this area, how are they getting funded? Are those academic institutions covering the funding for it?
Well, I wish they would come fund my foundation and just drop a bucket of money into our donate now page, so that we can do the research we want to do. But no, a lot of these institutions are getting funding through the NIH, through the National Institute of Drug Abuse, through NIDA, or other such similar institutions. So they have like institutional grants to set up these programs, and then within institutions that don't necessarily have specific, cannabis, or even at Hopkins, it's cannabis and psychedelics. I have a colleague at Yale. He has a Schedule 1 license, so he's able to do clinical trials, and he gets governmental funding through the NIH. So people are getting funding through these universities, mostly through NIH grants.
Joanna, Beth appears to be drinking a beer.
Well, tell her she should be drinking cannabis, because
Well, I was going to
alcohol.
say, so it's safer for her to eat a cannabis gummy or a couple of gummies. I don't know what the equivalent of gummies to one beer is, but is it really? Would your judgment, it's safer to take a equivalent amount of cannabis versus alcohol?
It's funny you ask me that, because in our questionnaires we have like an attitudes section, and that's one of the questions. Actually, I think it's do you think it's safer than drinking alcohol? And we have another one: do you think it's safer than smoking? I don't know if safer is the right word. I think that cannabis, I think we can say with some certainty that cannabis has medicinal uses. I mean, we can say that for sure. We know that it helps with certain medical conditions. Alcohol can calm you down if you're feeling stressed out, but I don't know that I would call that medical. So to each their own. Everyone needs to be able to be comfortable with whatever substance they put in their body, and if it's alcohol and it makes you feel good and you enjoy it, have at it.
So I have a question. I have never cared if anyone smoked pot. I went to high school in the 70s and college in the 80s. Had friends who did it, had boyfriends who smoked, never cared. I never got high, or at least I don't think I ever got high. I never felt like anything changed. I probably tried pot 10 times maybe in my life. Never felt like it made any difference at all. So are there some people who aren't susceptible to it? And would a gummy impact me differently than if I were smoking it?
Yes to both of your questions. There are some people. There are some genes that they believe are involved with metabolism of cannabis, and so some people respond better than others or differently than others. One person's 5 milligram gummy is another person's 25 milligram gummy. And people's tolerance changes over time, or they don't. I've been using cannabis for 10 years and I'm pretty much on the same dose I started on. My tolerance has not changed. I don't particularly respond to CBD. CBD is supposed to be this great anti-inflammatory and help with GI disease. I have an inflammatory disease and I have horrible GI disease. And so one summer I decided to start experimenting with CBD. And I went up to pretty high doses because in clinical trials, which you can do with CBD, they use incredibly high doses without seeing any negative effects. I mean, if you get too high, then people will start not too high. If you use too much CBD, eventually you will start seeing some adverse effects, but not at the level I was using. And I just never felt any better. It just wasn't doing anything for me. So yes, people respond differently. They metabolize it differently, and people's reactions will be different. And route of administration does make a difference. So inhalation is going to be very, very different than something that you ingest. The onset of action through inhalation is very fast, almost immediate, but the offset is also very fast. Whereas if you take an edible, the onset of action could take 45 minutes, but it can last for hours, which is why with edibles, you've got to be careful how much you take, because if you take too much, it's going to be in your system for many hours and you're going to have to deal with that discomfort. Whereas if you inhale too much, it's going to offset much more quickly.
So you're saying
So
that Beth really should have just smoked a lot more pot and then she would have gotten high.
Beth, when was the last time you tried it?
Gosh, it was probably 10 years ago, but it was at a leftover Grateful Dead show in Madison Square Garden with people like bringing their own homegrown.
Yeah, so who knows what that was? It could be very low THC. It could be that if you took it as a brownie, it could have had nothing in it. If you're interested in trying cannabis again, you can go to a dispensary and they tell you exactly what anything that's sold in a dispensary in any state has to be tested through some state regulated lab and come out with a certificate of analysis so that you know what's in it and that you're getting what you think you're getting. CBD is not regulated in the same way. You don't have to buy it in a dispensary. And there are a lot of issues with CBD where it will say that there's no THC. You have a lot of third parties that are just buying CBD off the shelf and testing it themselves to find out what's going on. And they'll see sometimes there's no CBD or less than what's on the bottle. It will say that there's no THC, and sometimes they'll find THC. Sometimes they'll find other substances like melatonin. So CBD has to be sourced very carefully from reputable companies that are willing to share their certificates of analysis so that, again, you're getting what you think you're getting and not something that's laced with things that you don't want. But it could be the reason why you never had a response to cannabis is that you may not have actually been getting any, depending on the source from which it came.
Yeah,
So when-
no, I it's never, I mean, variety of situations. I've never felt like I feel different now. This is, or, oh, I want to do this again because I feel like I don't normally feel. So I have
So
no
you could be,
desire to try it in any format
yeah.
because it's just never done anything for me. Why bother?
Well,
If a
you
doctor
could be a
recommended it,
non-responder, or it could just
Hmm.
be that you weren't using the right dose, right route of administration, or there are many factors that
Hmm.
could have caused that for you.
Beth, if a doctor recommended it to you for like a pain situation, would you try it under those circumstances?
Sure.
Okay.
That's what I was
Yes.
So
going to
you're
ask.
not
Yeah.
against trying it. It's just you don't think it's something recreationally that does much for you or does
Yeah.
anything.
I mean, I know if I have my beer at night, what the impact of that is going to be as far as like how I feel or if I enjoy it or I if every time I've ever tried smoking pot, I've never felt any difference. I've tried gummies a few times, didn't see like the people I were with were like, oh wow, and I was like, nothing. Why would I keep doing that? That just seems stupid. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not against it. As I said, I've
No,
no problem with anyone
yeah.
doing it. It's just why would I do something that's supposed to make me feel better or high or change and I don't feel it.
So
And look,
Beth,
I have coached athletes that have tried cannabis for a variety of indications, and I have one particular athlete that is the same way. Just no matter how much he takes, he just has no feelings from it whatsoever. It doesn't
Mhm.
Yeah.
make him. There's no psychoactivity. There's no calming effect. There's no nothing.
and Beth, I was the same way. I've done pot a handful of times, not 10. Um, and so when around COVID time and when Michigan it became legal, I went to a dispensary and I thought, okay, let's try edibles. Let's see what that does just for fun. And I made a fatal mistake of getting a Rice Krispie treat that had it, and I love Rice Krispie treats. So it looks like a regular Rice Krispie treat. It's not marked off like a piece of chocolate, like a Hershey's. You could have this, and I'm home alone and I'm doing my thing. I don't know if I was packing for some place or just cleaning or whatever, and I'm just chowing down on that Rice Krispie treat, not even like really thinking. I was a hot mess.
It sounds like me with
Um,
Remember
my
that.
patch.
yeah, I thought, let's just lay down for a little bit, like 4 hours later. And then when I remember when I was laying down, I was awake, but I was like, I can't move my arm. I can't lift my leg. It was like that. And wasn't that, it was just, it was an odd sensation. So I learned if I'm going to do it, I'm going to get something, and I've done it many times since then.
So when you go to
But I
Shelly's
stay
house,
away from a Rice Krispie
when you
treat.
go to
Well,
Shelly's house for
you took too much.
Halloween,
You
stay
probably needed
away
to
from the
cut that
Rice
into
Krispie
pieces.
treats there when you go to
Right,
Shelly's house.
right,
Jim's right.
right. Yeah, I needed to cut it in pieces, but there's a self control problem there with Rice Krispie treats.
Really?
What
So I
you
have a
With
needed
Rice
to
question.
do
Krispie
was
treats.
have an actual Rice Krispie treat on hand so that you could take your little dosed piece
There
and
you
then
go.
follow that up with
Ah,
a
see
non-dosed amount of
now,
Rice Krispie treats.
See, that's the scientist speaking
that's
there.
Harm
yes,
reduction.
that's a sensible suggestion. It
I have a
seems like.
question from early on when you were kind of going through your bio, and you said you went to see when you went to Boulder. You said you were at the university and you were working for what was the name of the department?
The
Did it have the word
Institute for
genetics in the
Behavior,
title?
yeah, the Institute for Behavioral Genetics.
All right,
So
talk to
my
me about that.
background is actually in genetic epidemiology.
Okay,
I
that's what
studied
the
birth
link.
defects.
Got it.
Although when they hired me more as an epidemiologist, biostatistician. They had people there that could do the genetic component of it, but they didn't actually have an epidemiologist or a high-level biostatistician. So I sort of transitioned out of the genetic aspect of things more into the epi biostats, and that's where I still am today. Um, Looking more at, I don't do much with genetics anymore. I do have the background, I understand genetics, but I haven't put it to use in quite some time.
Got it. That explains it. Because I was wondering if I was like, what's the genetic link? Is there a genetic investigations going on
Yes.
here? Is there a
So when I was
gene?
when I was there, they were looking at different genes for addiction, for conduct disorder, and other kinds of things. It's like a needle in a haystack because addiction, conduct disorder, the kinds of things that we were looking at, executive functioning, all of these things are multifactorial. There isn't one gene. It's going to be multiple genes, and then you're going to have an environmental component. We did twin studies and we did community, we had all kinds of participants in our studies. And it's just, it's so hard when you have these multifactorial conditions to try and really
Sure.
hone in on this
Sure.
is the gene. Whereas I think I mentioned earlier, I have a very rare genetic condition. It's a single gene disorder. They know the gene. But even on that gene, there are lots of mutations on that gene, some of which they've identified as disease causing variants and some they still haven't found. So, even with a single gene disorder and people have this condition, they are clinically diagnosed, they respond to the medication, they still can't figure out what gene variant they have. So, genetics is very complicated. With single gene disorders, when you're looking at multifactorial things, it just complicates it exponentially. Right,
I,
Shelley?
Yeah,
I,
yes, that's my life every day.
Yep.
I know. That's why I was like, I know there's that Shelley link in that way, and I wanted to bring it together. That's great. I have one more question. If does somebody else? I don't want to dominate, but
Go for it.
No,
I'm what
please.
I guess the other thing I'm wondering about is as you're doing research in this area, and obviously, trying to, I'm sure a big part of your time is just trying to raise the money so other people can do the research because you're magnify your effect. But like as you're doing the research, I assume that at this point, given that there are now companies out there, private industry companies making money from the sale and probably tracking use or tracking, I don't know, loyalty programs for people coming in or whatever they're doing. I imagine there's kind of industry knowledge out there that might be you could maybe leverage in some way and learn things from. Is that the case at all, or is it so early, too early to for even that for that to be, or maybe the industry is not even interested in doing anything useful. But I'm just curious. I feel like there'd probably be companies wanting to know more about this and what they're doing. Is that the case at all?
Yes and no. So, through clinical research, the CRO, the clinical research organization from which we do our clinical trials, we do have some industry sponsors that are paying for trials. Like there are some regulatory hurdles, but we do have some protocols that we've been able to get through institutional review board. So they are IRB approved, so that we have oversight for them. We're going to
Right.
kick that off hopefully sooner than later.
Great.
And we are writing a small business grant to the NIH for a device. It's a dose metered inhaler for cannabis. And so we are trying to get that grant written because we feel that this device has tremendous capability once things become legalized, and they will eventually. I have the vision that people get this device in the hospital with some cannabis, let's say post-operatively. So rather than giving somebody opioids, you may be able to give them cannabis instead. I'm hoping to get to the point that we can figure out that, gee, I had a knee replacement and I might still need an opioid, but if I take some cannabis with it, studies have shown that cannabis can actually enhance the effectiveness of an opioid and also make it last longer. So maybe if you give somebody an opioid with cannabis, they don't need as much opioids, and that could potentially reduce opioid use disorder, and they may not need that much cannabis, so they're not at risk for cannabis use disorder. So I see it being used in that capacity, and also for medical patients, being able to get precision dosing. When you use inhalation methods, which a lot of medical users use, when you're at, and even I, like I said, I don't like to inhale, but sometimes I'm in a situation where I'm in a lot of pain or I have no appetite and I want to eat dinner. I will use my device and I will use inhalation methods. And what they have found with this device is that most people who are using it medically are taking way more than they need for their indication. And I was actually shocked when I learned about the milligrams that people take with this device, because it does not correspond to the milligrams that you would take from an edible. So like if you take a 5 milligram edible, that's very much different than taking 5 milligrams of inhaled cannabis from this device. Like 5 milligrams would be a humongous dose. So
And
that's the whole
Joanna,
thing.
I wonder, do you think there's an opportunity to partner with like pharmacogenomic companies so that you can match that difference in effectiveness, like for the Beths of the world, who might have that genetic modifier in the cannabis use?
I mean, it's something we could look at, but those aren't really the kinds of clinical trials that we're doing at this point. Probably leave that to other people that are more interested in that aspect of things. We're looking at more medical indications.
Okay, fair.
And then I had a question on your book, The Champion Mindset. You said you're thinking about updating it. There's, the very well known both Simone Biles and
Who's Simone Biles?
Yeah.
the tennis player Naomi
Osaka.
Osaka, yeah.
Okay.
Hitting the pause button because of mental health issues. And these are elite athletes at the top of their game. Did your book cover that sort of thing? And are you thinking of incorporating that into an update if you do an update?
I did not incorporate mental health into my book for a variety of reasons. If and when I update my book to chronic conditions, I will have to include a mental health component because most people with chronic conditions have some kind of mental health issue. I mean, they may not have major depression or generalized anxiety disorder, but we all have, mood changes. Some have clinical depression. Some have situational depression. Some have anxiety. I'm on quite a few Facebook pages for the variety of conditions I have, and I don't go on Facebook much anymore. It's just a cesspool. But I do like to check in with my groups now and again. And I was on one for pericarditis. I have pericarditis. That's inflammation of the lining of the heart. And my rare genetic condition, one of the symptoms I get from that is pericarditis. It's horrendously painful, just awful. And I get it all the time. And when I was perusing the group yesterday, there was a whole thread on people like, I'm afraid to leave the house. I have anxiety. I don't go out alone. I'm afraid to drive. I'm afraid to do this. And so there's a lot of fear and anxiety around some of these conditions because of the pain, and nobody wants to have a major pain episode in public. And so then they become afraid of it, and then they become housebound. So that is a component I would cover because it is so pervasive in the world of chronic illness.
That's great.
I really think there was a missed opportunity between you and Snoop in Paris. I'm a little disappointed in you.
He was amazing, wasn't he? He was everywhere.
I loved Snoop before that. I really love Snoop now. We might have talked about this on a podcast.
It's an indication of some change in the culture that Snoop Dogg is like a TV show host now.
That's true.
Who would have predicted that 30 years ago, right?
So it was funny. Snoop showed up at the Olympic trials for track and field, and I think he had the best time of anybody there. And then he goes off to the Olympics, and he's like at every venue doing every single it really endeared me to him. He just, the respect that he showed the athletes, but the fun that he had, it was everything you want to see in an entertainer of his ilk.
Hey, but before we move on
to Los Angeles in 28.
Oh yeah.
Well, not as a competitor, but I will definitely be there as a spectator.
Okay, I hope to be there as well for the first time because if my son is still living out there, I'm going to be crashing on his couch.
Yeah, my family's out there.
Yeah, your family's out there.
My family's out there, so we will definitely be making a trip out for I can't wait.
Yeah.
I know Jim's going to do something else, but before we do that, Joanna, I don't want to lose the opportunity. I know you have a foundation, and I know you like to you are consciously looking for money. Tell us, how do people find you, and how do people find the foundation?
CannerResearchFoundation.org.
We should put that on the page when we publish the.
We will definitely include it. Yeah, and link.
Or you can just Venmo me,
Joanna. If you don't have to, excellent. And do you make deliveries?
I am
trying to
not
keep.
allowed to dispense cannabis, so no, I don't make deliveries.
If you don't, if you could stick around for a couple of minutes, I have a little presidential election fun fact quiz for you. Not very long. Some of you may have heard there's an election in 13 days. I don't know if anybody's heard anything
Election?
about
No,
that.
I don't know anything about it.
It's shocking, you know. That's because
I've
you're
got
being
my head
overrun.
buried in
Because
this.
you're in
I got my head
Colorado and
buried in
you're
the
being
scam.
overrun by dangerous immigrants, is what I understand.
Yes, we
So,
are. The Venezuelans. They're just ruining
Yeah.
our. They're ruining our
Yeah.
state.
Yes, I'm sure it's true. Anyway,
It's
4
been debunked.
questions to see how much you guys know about electoral history.
Nothing.
Okay, you can all collaborate. You can collaborate and give one joint answer.
All right.
What was the last Republican candidate who was elected president, who won the election, but lost the state of Texas? In other words, another candidate won the state of Texas, but the Republican candidate still won the election. You can give me the year or the person, whatever. Any thoughts? Any ideas?
I thought it was never. I thought they never. I thought that was
That
like the
is
rule.
not
So this
true.
is
Completely
okay. So
wrong.
I don't know because I thought it was.
I don't know.
It was
People
like
think
one of
it's
those
never
things.
because they don't remember back that far.
I'm
LBJ?
thinking Nixon or
LBJ?
something like way back when.
Nixon in 1968. Hubert Humphrey won the
Yes.
state, but Nixon was elected president.
Joanna on fire.
See,
Look at
Joanna is going to
that.
help because she's
All right,
smarter
mic
than
drop.
all of
I'm out of
us.
here.
She's smart.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Next
keep Joanna
question.
on our team.
What was the last Republican candidate that was elected president but didn't win the state of Florida?
Bush.
Nope. Yeah, and you could have been trying to get one of the two Bushes, but no, that's not. That didn't. They won it. The times they won. They won Florida.
Well, did they though?
Huh? Well, all right. Well, then he wouldn't have won if he had lost Florida, but that's another story. He was ruled to have won Florida. We'll put
Yes.
it that way. Let's not go
I'm
all
stuck.
crazy.
No idea. Give me a window.
You have
No
to go
idea.
further back than
Give me
Nixon.
a
You have to
half
go
a
further
century.
back than Nixon.
Further back than Nixon.
Further back than Nixon.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kennedy.
Anybody want to even guess?
Eisenhower.
Anybody remember who the Republican
Kennedy?
presidents are? How about that? No.
Oh right, you said Republican. I didn't get that right. You said
Yeah.
Republican
That's okay.
president. So wow.
So
I have
not
no
Eisenhower.
idea who would have
That
lost
was
Not
my
Eisenhower.
guess.
Florida.
Okay.
Before Eisenhower. So now you're back, way back now.
Way back.
I will give you the answer. Exactly 100 years ago, Calvin Coolidge won, but did not win the state of Florida.
Oh my god.
He
All
was
right,
the
you could have given
last
me all day. I would not have gotten that.
I wouldn't have gotten that one.
Now,
either,
two more questions, but one more along this line. What was the last Republican elected president who did not win the state of Ohio?
Wow, you dug deep for these, Jim.
Just, I nerded
Shelley's
out.
looking it up on her phone.
Are you? You're cheating. Cheating, Shelley. Well, since Shelley is cheating, I'm going to tell you that it's a trick question because no Republican has ever been elected president without winning the state of Ohio.
Okay.
All the way
was
back to
thinking for
Lincoln.
Texas.
You had the wrong state, John.
Darn
Texas
it.
used to be, back in the day,
I remember
almost
hearing the bellwether
exclusively a
stuff.
Democratic state because it was part of the Solid South. So for many years, Democrats always won Texas. Okay,
So Jim,
more question.
one more question.
One more question. The last presidential election in 2020, hopefully we can all agree that Donald Trump did not win that election. But here's the question. What state did he win the most votes? Not the highest percentage of the votes, but what state did he get the most raw total? For any of the states, one state he got more votes in that state than any other state. Do you understand what I mean?
California?
Actual numbers of votes, not the percentage of the votes in the state, but the actual.
So it's a big
high.
state. So it's a
Well,
big
it's
state.
got to be something
Yeah,
like
so it's probably
Texas,
California.
California.
Texas, California.
California. Donald Trump
Yeah.
got 6 million votes in California. How many votes did Joe Biden get in California?
Wait, Trump
More
got
than 6 million.
Yeah, he got 6 million. How many do you think Biden got?
6,000,001.
No, it was
12
not even like
million.
a. Biden
12
got
million.
11 million votes in California.
Wow,
California
that's
had a
amazing.
lot of votes.
There's
in
a
the
lot of
last
votes in
election.
California. Yeah, I figured.
Um,
Wow.
If you
Wow.
take the 5 million votes by which Biden won the popular vote in California and the approximately 2 million votes by which he won the popular vote in New York, that is basically equal to the 7 million vote margin of his popular vote victory in the United States. So if you take
There you go.
all the other states and the District of Columbia,
Yeah.
it was basically a draw. But
Yeah.
those
Yeah,
two
Well, that's why I
definitions-
think our system does not work. That right now
Yes.
we are hinging an entire election that is so
on
important
7
on
states or
a
something.
couple, but not even the whole
Mhm.
state.
No.
Like
Yeah,
Right.
no, that's
subsets
right.
A few
of the
thousand
state.
voters.
Right.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
You're
subsets of a
absolutely
state.
right.
It
And I
should
mean,
not be. It should not be how it is.
to
That
be
is so
fair,
frustrating.
it also means that there are 6 million people in California who voted for Republican, and essentially, it doesn't mean anything because
Right.
they
It goes.
voted.
It's both ways. It's
Yeah, it
ridiculous.
goes both
Yeah.
ways. It's not just that it means that there's a lot of people in New York who vote Republican, and it would matter maybe in a congressional district depending on which congressional district they live, but it doesn't matter in a presidential election under normal circumstances.
Yeah. Goodbye, electoral
And
college.
Democrats in Indiana, for that matter, or Republicans in Illinois, or
Well,
where.
we should be the think tank and bring this up at the next board meeting and
Well,
figure out how we're going to change this.
I heard someone say this once, that in 2004, if John Kerry had pulled off the upset and won Ohio, which wasn't that far off, he would have won the election even though he lost the popular vote. And if you had had a election in 2000 where a Democrat lost the election but won the popular vote, and followed that up with one where the Republican lost the election and won the popular vote, you might have had a bipartisan push to
Mm.
change the electoral college, because it would have been like, look, this is not working for anybody. But now, because the electoral college seems to have a slant one way,
One way.
it's going
Well,
to take
gerrymandering helps with that.
Yeah. Well, the gerrymandering doesn't really affect the allocations between states. It allocates how they're
That's yes, but
within the
there
states.
are
Anyway,
so many things that we need to fix.
that's
No
it.
kidding.
You did
Where do
very
we
well,
start?
Guy. You
Thanks,
did very
man.
well, gang.
Thanks.
Do we all
for
get a
putting me-
prize?
Well,
A
I don't
booby
know.
prize. We only got one.
Prizes.
Really.
I showed up tonight. That was
All
it.
right, all right. That's great, Jim. Thanks a lot. We got to go. We are thankful that you guys came. Everybody came. Joanna, we're particularly thrilled that you came back. We hope you will come again, and we will continue to narrow our queries as we go. But before we sign off, we'd like to share some important information. Obviously, thank you to everybody. Thank you to my husband, Ted Henley, for making our music. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, that's great. And one of the best things you can do for us is give us a like, or give us a thumbs up, or just share the link. We're also on YouTube. So if you haven't seen our faces before, you don't want to, but you can. But you can. And if you're listening on one of our other on any other podcast player, and we aspire to be on all of them, we're on Stitcher, Castro, Dogcatcher, Overcast, Podcast Addict, Pocket Casts, and we're on Spotify. At least one of our listeners has asked me what Stitcher is, and I'm happy to give you a lowdown. If you want to talk to me sometime, give me a phone call or text, and I can give you an earful. But in terms of shameless pitches for support, we are just a little tiny podcast, but we would love your support. And honestly, the number one way we could use your support is for you to share the link to the show. We'd love it if you sent this to somebody else, so that we can spread what we're doing, because we actually do care about what we're doing. We want to do a good job, and we'd love for you to share it with others. We've gained a lot of listeners this way, and it's actually really pleasant when we get amazing feedback from new listeners. Money wise, you can buy us a virtual coffee or become a patron on Patreon. Links for those are in the show notes. And we're always on the lookout for fascinating guests and stories. So if you know somebody, or know someone, or a story that we should be telling, please pass it along to us. As far as social media goes, as much as we mostly detest it. We are on all the social media, the main social media suspects: X, Instagram, Facebook. I personally have got us on Blue Sky, which is probably what Twitter should be, and it's much nicer people, and a little bit smaller of a community, but a nice place to be. Anyway, if you've got thoughts, questions, or just want to say hi, you can always email us directly in searchofanargument@gmail.com. You can direct message us. You can just give us a call, or you can send Joanna money on Venmo. Remember, we're doing this show for ourselves, but we're also here to help and connect with you. So if there's anything else any other way that we can lend a hand, don't be shy to reach out. So thanks for tuning in. We learn so much from each other and every guest on every episode. We hope you do too. So until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and we'll catch you then.